Everyone knows that Apple was founded by the two Steves, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Steve Jobs was the inspiration and marketing side of the business, while Steve Wozniak was the brains behind the business. But what about Apple's third co-founder, Ronald Wayne? Ronald Wayne was the adult of the business and made sure that the Steves didn't go too far off the edge. Yet most people, myself included, had no clue that Ronald was even involved in the creation of Apple. And that makes sense as Ronald left Apple quite early on, so he wasn't there when Apple finally made it. Ronald is still alive today though, so what happened to Apple's unknown co-founder? Taking a look back, Ronald was born on May 17, 1934 in Cleveland, Ohio. We don't know much about his early life, but it seems like Ronald was quite passionate about engineering, design, and product development. He ended up attending the School of Industrial Arts in New York City, and after graduation in 1953, Ronald taught himself electromechanical engineering. At the time, electrical and computer engineering were still very much in the early stages, so Ronald's self-education was more than enough to get him a job in the field. In 1956, Ronald moved to California, where he secured a job as chief engineer at a military electronics company where he would work for 16 years. Near the end of his career at this company, Ronald became a bit entrepreneurial and decided to start his own business. In 1971, at an age of 37, Ronald started selling slot machines. Unfortunately, this was a massive failure, and Ronald ended up going into significant debt. Ronald later recalled that he discovered very quickly that he had no business going into business. He was a great engineer, and it was best to just call it at that. So, Ronald picked up a new engineering job at a new startup called Atari, and he would spend the next year repaying the debt he had accumulated. Just as Ronald thought he was completely done with business though, he would run into two co-workers at Atari named Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Wozniak says that he admired Ronald's experience with starting a business and that he looked up to Ronald for advice on life. Ronald was substantially older than both Steves, so he easily molded to becoming a sort of mentor in the duo's lives. Ronald often settled debates between the two, and one of these debates would actually turn into Apple. In March of 1976, Steve Jobs came to Ronald with a conundrum. He and Wozniak had been working on developing circuitry for a personal computer. Jobs wanted to leverage the circuitry and build a personal computer business, and Wozniak was on board with this idea. However, Wozniak did not understand why they couldn't just sell the circuitry itself as well. Jobs tried to explain that the circuitry should be proprietary and that selling it would just put them at a disadvantage. But Wozniak didn't quite understand. So, Jobs wanted Ronald to explain to Wozniak why he shouldn't sell the circuitry. Ronald agreed and told the two to come to his apartment on April 1, 1976 to sort out the issue. When Ronald explained the situation to Wozniak, Wozniak quickly came around and agreed to not sell the circuitry. Jobs was quite impressed with how easily Ronald was able to convince Wozniak, and both Jobs and Wozniak looked up to Ronald, so Jobs figured it would be a good idea to get Ronald to join the company as well. Right after Ronald convinced Wozniak, Jobs asked Ronald if he would be willing to join Apple. Ronald agreed, and the trio would make it official by incorporating the company. Both Steves owned 45% each, while Ronald owned 10%. This way, Ronald was able to break ties between the Steves. After founding the company, Ronald would get to work on illustrating the first Apple logo, writing the Apple I manual, and drafting the trio's partnership agreement. While Ronald worked on these administrative tasks, Jobs went out and started making aggressive deals, which made Ronald quite uncomfortable. For example, Jobs took out a $15,000 line of credit to buy materials required to fill Apple's first order. That's the same as a $72,000 line of credit today. To make things even worse, Apple's first customer was a company called the Byte Shop, which was notorious for paying out its vendors late. And here's the thing, everyone involved in the partnership was personally responsible for paying back the debt. Now, ideally, Wozniak and Jobs would be responsible for 90% of the debt, and Ronald would only be responsible for 10% of the debt. But the problem was that Wozniak and Jobs were broke 20-year-olds with no assets. So if things turned sour, Wozniak and Jobs would likely just file for bankruptcy, and it would be up to Ronald to pay back the creditors. In other words, if the business did well, Ronald only got 10% of the profit. But if the business did poorly, Ronald would experience 100% of the fallback. Given that Ronald had just recently spent a year digging himself out of debt, Ronald wasn't willing to take such a massive financial risk. Something else that dissuaded Ronald from sticking around was the type of work he had to do. As we previously discussed, Ronald's passion was engineering and product design. But at Apple, Ronald mainly just worked on administrative tasks, while Wozniak and Jobs actually built the core of the business. Ronald didn't feel like it was his place to ask for a product-oriented role in the company either, as he recognized that he was, quote, standing in the shadow of giants. So, 12 days after joining the company, Ronald would respectfully part ways with Wozniak and Jobs and renounce his role in the company. In return for his 10% stake in Apple, Ronald received a total of $800, or about $3,800 today. Wozniak actually disagrees with this timeline, claiming that Ronald didn't leave until a few months after the company was started. Either way though, the consensus is that Ronald left very early on, well before Apple found any sort of substantial success. Ronald stayed at Atari up until 1978, at which point he switched to Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Meanwhile, Jobs wasn't very fond of Ronald's decision, and he would attempt to get Ronald back on board for quite some time. About a year after Ronald's departure though, Jobs finally gave in and moved to ensuring that there were no lingering remains of Ronald in the business. Jobs paid Ronald an additional $1,500 and got him to sign a quitclaim deed, which basically meant that Ronald gave up all legal rights to Apple or any of its assets. And with that, it was official. Ronald was completely out of the business for a total of $2,300 or about $11,000 today. Later on in the 1970s, Ronald would start his own business, but it was nowhere near as ambitious as Apple. Ronald opened a small stamp shop in California, but unfortunately, he would experience a number of robberies, and Ronald would decide to move his business across the border to Nevada. Jobs would approach Ronald one more time with a request to connect Jobs with one of Ronald's friends. Jobs was looking to buy the company that Ronald's friend owned, but Ronald refused to relay the message. Ronald felt that his friend should retain control of his company, and that his friend should form an exclusive licensing deal with Apple as opposed to selling out altogether. Ronald later regretted this decision, citing that it was not his decision to make. And that was the last time Jobs tried to contact Ronald for a business. Anyway, Ronald did take a few remnants with him to Nevada from his days at Apple. Ronald used a very similar logo for his stamp shop, Wayne's Philatelics. Ronald also still had the original Apple partnership contract paper, which he would sell in the early 1990s for $500. That same contract paper would end up auctioning for $1.6 million in 2011. And Ronald did end up regretting the sale, as there was really no financial risk to just holding onto the contract. And that brings us into the billion-dollar question. Did Ronald regret his decision to leave Apple, and was he salty for giving up his stake? Well, the answer is no. I'm sure Ronald wishes he stayed around, but he does not regret his decision to leave. Ronald says that he made the best decision he could with the information he had at the time. Moreover, he didn't leave Apple because he thought the company would fail. In fact, he thought the company would succeed. That's why he joined the company. But he knew that the road to success was going to be extremely bumpy, which he was right about. And he simply wasn't willing to experience the ups and downs of the journey. Ronald describes that leading Jobs and Wozniak was like having a tiger by its tail, and that he was getting old and couldn't keep up with that. Ronald claims that the stress of staying at Apple would have likely resulted in him becoming the richest man in the cemetery. So it wasn't like Ronald was rooting for Apple to fail after he left or anything. In fact, I think he's quite happy about Apple's success. Considering this extremely mature approach to missing out on one of the biggest opportunities in history, it's no wonder why the Steves wanted Ronald around. But what if Ronald held onto his stake? How much would he be worth today? Well, Apple currently stands at a valuation of $2.4 trillion, meaning that the entire 10% stake would be worth $240 billion. But it's completely unrealistic to expect Ronald to hold on to the entire 10% for 45 years. The best case scenario would be Ronald selling 2% for living expenses and retaining an 8% stake in the company, which would give him a net worth of $192 billion. More realistically though, Ronald would likely hold a 3 to 5% stake today, which comes out to about $100 billion. Something else to consider is that Apple nearly went bankrupt in the late 1990s, so I don't think Ronald would have held through that uncertainty. Considering this, Ronald would have likely dumped his stake in the 80s and 90s even if he stuck around at Apple, meaning that he would have cashed out for a few $100 million, which is a far cry from $100 billion. In any case though, sticking around at Apple would have resulted in a much better life for Ronald financially, as Ronald lives a pretty modest retirement life today. He currently lives in a mobile home park in Nevada, and makes some money on the side selling stamps and rare coins and playing penny slots in Vegas. That's quite a stark contrast to what his life could have been, but I think Ronald says it best. What can I say? You make a decision based on your understanding of the circumstances, and you live with it. Would you guys have left Apple if you were in Ronald's situation? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you respect how Ronald handled the missed opportunity. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas, and consider subscribing to see more questions actually answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.